The world stage is constantly shifting, with numerous significant events unfolding globally. Today, we turn our focus inward, examining a critical issue developing within the United States. They often call America the land of opportunity, a place where dreams can take flight. But what happens when that potential opportunity encounters a hard stop at a state border? Imagine this scenario. You're stopped by law enforcement for something minor, like a non-functioning taillight. The next thing you realize, you're confronting the terrifying prospect of deportation. Does this sound overly dramatic? Perhaps. Yet it's a stark reality unfolding right now in specific regions of the U.S. The place you reside could determine the difference between living in relative safety and being under constant surveillance, fearing every interaction with authority. Why are certain states intensifying their crackdowns on undocumented individuals, enacting stricter measures, while others appear to remain passive or silent on the matter? What's driving the emergence of new legislation that feels less like standard rules and more like pointed warnings directed at a specific population? Prepare yourselves, because if you lack legal documentation, these 10 states we're about to discuss might represent the most perilous places to consider home within the current American landscape. We'll delve into the specifics, state by state, exploring the laws, the enforcement climate, and the real-world consequences for those living without papers. Stick around until the end, as we'll summarize the key takeaways and offer some concluding thoughts on this complex and evolving situation. Before we dive deeper, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Your support is crucial for us to continue bringing important stories like this to light and helps immensely in promoting our content. Also, drop a comment below, letting us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from our audience around the globe. Let's begin our countdown, starting with number 10, Texas. You might think you're secure simply because you've resided here for many years, established roots, maybe even raised a family. Think again. In the Lone Star State, even a routine trip to the supermarket could potentially lead to being detained and placed behind bars if you don't possess the required documentation. This isn't hyperbole. It reflects the current aggressive stance on immigration enforcement. We're talking about Texas, a state where the clampdown on immigration has reached full throttle, creating an environment of heightened fear and uncertainty for many. In the year 2023, Texas lawmakers passed the highly controversial Senate Bill 4. This legislation significantly altered the landscape of immigration enforcement by granting state and local police officers the authority to arrest and deport individuals suspected of being undocumented immigrants. This marked a major shift, transferring powers traditionally held by federal agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, directly to local cops on the street. The implications are profound. A simple traffic stop or any interaction with local police could now escalate into an immigration investigation, potentially leading to detention and removal proceedings. The law doesn't just stop at empowering local officers. It introduces severe penalties that escalate the risks for undocumented individuals. If apprehended and deported, re-entering the state of Texas becomes a felony offense. Depending on the circumstances, this could result in a prison sentence of up to 20 years. Consider that for a moment. 2 decades behind bars simply for attempting to return to a place you may have considered home, perhaps where your family still resides. Does this sound exceptionally harsh? It is. And what makes it even more contentious is that this isn't a federal statute reflecting national policy. It's a state-level initiative, Texas taking matters into its own hands, pushing the boundaries of state versus federal authority over immigration. Naturally, Senate Bill 4 has faced significant legal challenges. Lawsuits were filed almost immediately, arguing that the law infringes on federal jurisdiction over immigration matters and raises serious constitutional concerns about due process and potential racial profiling. While these legal battles are ongoing, and the ultimate fate of the law remains uncertain as it navigates the court system, the immediate effect is undeniable. The fear is already palpable within immigrant communities across Texas. The question lingers ominously. Could your next encounter for a minor traffic violation, like that broken taillight, transform into a one-way journey out of the country? If you are residing in Texas without documentation, under the shadow of Senate Bill 4, the answer might tragically be yes. The consequences are not just severe. They are, by any measure, absolutely brutal. potentially shattering lives and tearing families apart over infractions that previously wouldn't have involved immigration status. Make sure to watch this video until the very end, as we'll be drawing some important conclusions from these state-specific situations. Moving on to number 9. Oklahoma. Just when you thought the situation couldn't become more precarious, consider the developments in the Sooner State. Wait until you hear about the policies enacted in this neighboring state, just one state line away from the intense environment of Texas. Oklahoma is actively setting its own legal traps for the undocumented, and recent evidence shows these measures are indeed being enforced. It seems a trend is emerging, with states taking increasingly hardline stances. In the year 2024, Oklahoma lawmakers followed a similar path to Texas by passing a bill that criminalizes the act of being in Oklahoma without legal authorization. This legislation makes it a specific state crime, separate from federal immigration law, to reside within Oklahoma's borders illegally. The potential penalties are severe. A first offense under this law could lead to up to 2 years of imprisonment in a state facility. Imagine serving time simply for your presence within the state. But the punishment doesn't end upon release. After completing their sentence, individuals convicted under this law are given a mere 72 hours to leave Oklahoma. Failure to depart within this tight time frame puts them at risk of being arrested again, facing further charges and potentially longer sentences. This approach isn't just harsh. It appears calculated to create an environment where undocumented individuals feel constantly pressured to leave. What if you are pulled over for a minor issue, say, a busted headlight? Could that be enough to trigger this cascade of consequences? Absolutely. Under this new law, any interaction with law enforcement, regardless of the initial reason, can lead to questions about immigration status. You would be astonished at how rapidly someone's situation can deteriorate, going from a roadside stop for a vehicle maintenance issue directly into a jail cell, facing state criminal charges related to their immigration status. The Oklahoma law explicitly mandates that local police officers must enforce it. This effectively transforms everyday officers, the ones patrolling neighborhoods and responding to local calls, into de facto immigration agents. Their duties now extend beyond typical local law enforcement into the complex and federally regulated realm of immigration status determination and enforcement. Does this sound extreme? It undoubtedly is. And if you believe that perhaps these laws are just on the books but not actively enforced, think again. Reports indicate that the state has already made dozens of arrests under this new legislation shortly after its enactment. It's not just a theoretical threat. It's actively being implemented, and the enforcement mechanisms are just beginning to ramp up. The implications are chilling, suggesting a future where minor interactions carry the weight of potential imprisonment and forced departure, based solely on one's documentation status within the state of Oklahoma. Number 8 takes us to Iowa. The situation escalates further as we examine the heartland. It often starts subtly, in places characterized by calm landscapes, small towns, seemingly quiet roads, and perhaps even friendly faces greeting you. But don't allow this tranquil facade to mislead you. This state, Iowa, is quietly but rapidly transforming into one of the most stringent environments for undocumented immigrants in the nation. Following the legislative patterns seen in Texas and Oklahoma, Iowa decided to take decisive action regarding immigration enforcement at the state level. Inspired directly by Texas's controversial Senate Bill 4, Iowa lawmakers passed their own similar bill in early 2024. This legislation effectively makes it illegal, under state law, to be present within Iowa's borders if you are undocumented. The speed at which this law was enacted is noteworthy. It seemed to move through the legislative process with remarkable swiftness, signed, sealed, and immediately ready for enforcement across the state. And here's the crucial detail that amplifies the danger. Under this Iowa law, you don't need to be committing any other crime. Simply being undocumented is now considered a state-level offense, sufficient grounds for arrest and prosecution. This means that your very presence, lacking the proper federal authorization, is criminalized by the state itself. The law empowers local law enforcement officers, Sheriffs, deputies, city police, to question and detain anyone they suspect might not have the legal right to be in the state. Does that sound vague? That's precisely the point, and critics argue it opens the door to potential profiling and arbitrary stops. A routine traffic stop, an ordinary request for identification, or even just being in a neighborhood deemed suspicious by an officer could spiral quickly into a full-blown legal nightmare, focused entirely on your immigration status. But wait, it gets even more severe. If an individual is caught, prosecuted under this state law, and subsequently deported, the act of re-entering Iowa could lead to felony charges at the state level. The potential penalties associated with this re-entry offense are significant. We're talking about years spent in prison, not just a few months. This isn't merely a scare tactic designed to deter entry. It's a punitive measure with life-altering consequences. Authorities in Iowa have reportedly begun enforcing this law vigorously. Multiple arrests and deportations linked to this new state statute were reported within just weeks of the bill going into effect. Families are being torn apart, rapidly and decisively. Reports describe children being left behind as parents are detained, homes being abandoned overnight as residents flee the state, and entire communities living under a constant shadow of fear. For those who might think, "This can't happen to me," consider this. What if one wrong turn while driving, one broken taillight noticed by an officer, or one random ID check changes everything? Iowa isn't just mirroring Texas's policies. Arguably, it's intensifying them, with potentially less media scrutiny and perhaps less organized resistance compared to larger border states. These laws can be implemented swiftly and with devastating effect. That makes the situation potentially even more dangerous. The scariest laws are often the quiet ones, the ones people don't fully notice or understand until it's too late. In Iowa, that silence surrounding the implementation is proving to be particularly perilous for undocumented residents. Let's journey south to number 7, Florida. Sunshine, beautiful beaches, theme parks, the quintessential image of paradise. However, beneath this sunny exterior, Florida has cultivated some of the most severe immigration laws and enforcement practices found anywhere in the United States. If you are undocumented, the Sunshine State's welcome can feel decidedly chilly, and the risks associated with living there have escalated dramatically. Welcome to Florida, where the dream of paradise can quickly evaporate if you lack legal status. In March of 2025, the state significantly ramped up its immigration enforcement measures, implementing policies that went further than ever before. New legislation, championed and signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis, introduced harsher penalties for undocumented immigrants, particularly if they are apprehended while committing other crimes, even nonviolent ones. This creates a double jeopardy situation where immigration status severely magnifies the consequences of any legal infraction. But here's a detail that sent shockwaves through communities. The law specifically targets driving without a valid license. In Florida, this offense can now lead to substantially longer jail sentences, purely based on the driver's immigration status. This means a common issue for undocumented individuals. The inability to obtain a driver's license is now weaponized, potentially turning a simple traffic stop into a reason for prolonged incarceration. It's not just the laws themselves, it's the pervasive system built around them. Florida consistently ranks among the states with the highest deportation rates in the country. Official figures reveal that thousands of families were separated by deportation proceedings originating in Florida in the last year alone. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, raids have reportedly become more frequent, more aggressive in their tactics, and increasingly public, contributing to a climate of fear. The reach of immigration enforcement extends into seemingly safe spaces. Hospitals in Florida are now mandated to inquire about a patient's immigration status upon admission. Yes, you heard that correctly. Seeking essential medical help could inadvertently become a risk, potentially exposing one's status to authorities. Imagine the impossible choice: forego necessary medical treatment or risk detention and deportation. And what about the children of undocumented parents? The situation is equally fraught. Schools have reportedly begun implementing policies that could lead to the reporting of undocumented guardians during routine enrollment processes. The fear is tangible and real, creeping into every aspect of daily life, from finding work, where employers face stricter verification mandates, to sending children to school, to accessing basic health care. The cumulative effect is devastating. Communities are shrinking as families flee, seeking refuge in neighboring states perceived as less hostile. Some are even contemplating the drastic step of leaving the United States altogether, abandoning the lives they've built. It's crucial to understand the speed of this transformation. Just 5 years ago, many parts of Florida were viewed as relatively safe havens for immigrant communities. Today, those same areas are often described as trap zones, where any misstep can have dire consequences. And the trajectory suggests things are only likely to get tougher. Lawmakers are already pushing for even stricter measures, including mandatory immigration status checks at public job sites and increased funding for local law enforcement to cooperate directly with ICE. So, ask yourself this critical question. What happens when the institutions you rely on, your doctor, your child's teacher, even your boss, become potential threats due to state mandates? What happens when navigating normal life becomes an impossible tightrope walk? In Florida, this isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's the lived reality for many undocumented individuals, and the clock is relentlessly ticking. Continuing our list at number 6 is Georgia. What if every move you made, every daily routine, felt like walking through a minefield? Every school drop-off, every clock-in at your job, every trip to the local store. Imagine each of these ordinary activities carrying the potential for catastrophic consequences, not because you're actively breaking a law in that moment, but simply because you exist without the correct federal paperwork. This chilling reality is increasingly descriptive of the situation in Georgia, where being undocumented isn't just difficult, it's becoming a daily, high-stakes gamble with life-altering repercussions. In 2024, Georgia intensified its already formidable stance on immigration enforcement. Building on existing frameworks, a new wave of laws was enacted, further empowering local police agencies to detain individuals suspected of being in the U.S. illegally and to turn them over to federal immigration authorities. Crucially, these state laws often grant local officers the authority to initiate immigration inquiries, even without a separate warrant or clear evidence of another crime being committed. Simply appearing suspicious in the eyes of an officer can be enough to trigger an investigation into one's status. And it's essential to understand that Georgia's involvement in immigration enforcement isn't just about ICE anymore. The state has a significant history with the 287G program. This federal program creates agreements that delegate federal immigration enforcement authority directly to state and local law enforcement officers. Georgia has consistently ranked among the top 5 states in the nation for the number of active 287G agreements. This means that in many counties across Georgia, local law enforcement personnel are trained and authorized to act essentially as immigration officers. This blurs the line significantly. You don't need to encounter a federal agent to face immigration consequences. The local sheriff's deputy who pulls you over for speeding, or the city police officer responding to a minor disturbance, might also be actively looking for reasons to inquire about your immigration status. This deep integration of local and federal immigration enforcement creates a pervasive net. Furthermore, Georgia is home to one of the largest immigrant detention centers in the entire United States, the Stewart Detention Center. This facility has long been a subject of controversy, with critics frequently referring to it as a black hole due to reported difficulties in accessing legal counsel, challenging conditions, and the sheer volume of individuals processed through its system. The existence of such a large, federally contracted detention center within the state underscores the infrastructure supporting aggressive immigration enforcement. Once someone enters the detention system in Georgia, navigating the legal process and securing release can feel overwhelmingly difficult, almost impossible for many. The fear generated by these policies extends deep into communities, particularly in rural areas where resources and legal aid may be scarcer. Unlike in some major cities with established sanctuary policies or stronger community support networks, residents in smaller towns or agricultural regions often face heightened vulnerability. There are fewer legal safety nets, less visibility, and potentially greater reliance on local authorities who may be actively participating in immigration enforcement. It's an environment characterized not by overt conflict, but by a crushing silence and the constant anxiety of survival. Even children are not immune to this climate. While schools themselves might not directly deport students, the fear surrounding parental status has a profound impact. Undocumented parents live with the constant worry that any interaction with school officials, providing documents for enrollment, attending parent-teacher conferences, could inadvertently lead to their detection and detention, leaving their children behind. Reports have surfaced of undocumented students disappearing from school rolls mid-semester, likely due to families relocating out of fear. So, consider this. What kind of state treats hardworking families, contributing members of the community, essentially as fugitives? What kind of place transforms everyday errands, like going to work or taking your child to school, into potential immigration checkpoints? In Georgia, the answer seems increasingly clear, painted right outside your front door by a complex web of state laws, federal agreements, and a formidable detention infrastructure. At number 5, we arrive in Alabama. If you want to discuss a state going all in on restrictive immigration policies, you absolutely need to understand what has happened, and is potentially happening again, in Alabama. Here, immigration enforcement isn't just aggressive. It has historically been relentless, employing tactics that reach into almost every facet of public life. Long before some of the more recent state-level crackdowns gained national attention, Alabama already had a notorious reputation earned through its infamous House Bill 56. And now, in 2025, there are signs that the spirit, if not the exact letter, of that law is experiencing a concerning resurgence. You might recall HB 56, a piece of legislation passed years ago that was widely dubbed, at the time, as the toughest immigration law in the nation. Its provisions were sweeping and severe. It required police to check the immigration status of anyone they stopped and suspected of being undocumented. It mandated schools to verify the immigration status of enrolling students. It criminalized giving an undocumented immigrant a ride or renting property to them. It even invalidated contracts entered into by undocumented individuals. The impact was immediate and devastating. Reports detailed thousands of Latino students staying home from school out of fear. The agricultural sector suffered significant labor shortages as workers fled the state. Businesses faced uncertainty, and the Southern Poverty Law Center received an overwhelming number of calls to its helpline in the law's initial weeks. Although parts of HB 56 were eventually struck down by federal courts as unconstitutional infringements on federal authority and violations of civil rights, the underlying sentiment and the enforcement infrastructure it fostered have lingered. Lawmakers in Alabama have continued working diligently, often behind the scenes, to find new, legally refined ways to achieve similar outcomes. They are crafting revised versions of restrictive measures, aiming to withstand legal challenges while still creating an intensely hostile environment for undocumented residents. One recent bill, for example, forces employers, not just large corporations, but potentially even smaller businesses, to rigorously verify the immigration status of all employees, not just during the hiring process, but potentially through random audits afterward. This means that even if you've held your job securely for years, you remain perpetually at risk of being reported and fired based on a sudden check of your documentation status. It creates instability and fear in the workplace. And the pressure doesn't stop there. The state actively encourages landlords to report tenants they suspect might be undocumented. This turns housing, a basic necessity, into another potential vulnerability. Your home is no longer necessarily a safe space. One knock on the door from an inquiring officer, perhaps prompted by an anonymous tip from a neighbor or landlord, could lead to detention and the initiation of deportation proceedings before you've even finished your morning coffee. The sheer number of people who have already chosen to leave Alabama voluntarily, seeking less hostile environments elsewhere, speaks volumes. Families packing up their entire lives overnight, children being abruptly pulled from school, entire communities vanishing. These are the tangible consequences of such policies. And it appears that this outcome is precisely what some politicians in Alabama desire. They have made their intentions clear through legislation and public statements. Alabama is not interested in welcoming or integrating immigrants. It is focused on driving them out. Hospitals, too, are reportedly under increasing pressure, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly through policy interpretations, to report patients who lack proper documentation. Imagine needing urgent medical care but hesitating, fearing that seeking help could lead to your name ending up in an immigration database. The system in Alabama seems designed to corner undocumented individuals, forcing them to choose between living in the shadows, constantly hiding, or leaving the state entirely. And regardless of the choice, the outcome often feels like a loss. Loss of community, loss of livelihood, loss of stability. The legacy of HB 56 continues to cast a long shadow over Alabama. Number 4 brings us to Arizona. Have you ever felt like the law itself is watching you, scrutinizing your every move the moment you step outside your door? In Arizona, for many undocumented individuals, that feeling isn't just paranoia. It's rooted in a history of some of the most controversial and aggressive state-level immigration enforcement in American history. The law here doesn't just stare. It historically followed, questioned, and sometimes detained based on mere suspicion. This isn't a new development in the Grand Canyon state. For years, Arizona has been ground zero for intense debates and pioneering legislation concerning immigration. You've likely heard of Senate Bill 1070, the infamous Show Me Your Papers law. It made national and international headlines back in 2010 when it was enacted. This law empowered and, in some interpretations, required police officers to demand proof of legal status from anyone they stopped for another violation if they had reasonable suspicion that the person might be undocumented. The law sparked massive protests and widespread condemnation from civil rights groups, who argued it institutionalized racial profiling. Critics pointed out that reasonable suspicion was dangerously vague and could easily lead to harassment of anyone who looked or sounded foreign. Supporters, however, defended it as a necessary tool for enforcing immigration law at the state level. While key parts of SB 1070 were eventually struck down or modified following legal challenges that reached the Supreme Court, its legacy persists. The law normalized a heightened level of scrutiny and cooperation between local police and federal immigration authorities in Arizona. And here's the crucial update for 2025. The spirit of SB 1070 hasn't disappeared. It's evolving. Enforcement has ramped up again under new state leadership and initiatives. Today, Arizona has extended significant powers to county sheriff's departments, particularly in border-adjacent regions like Maricopa County, to collaborate heavily with federal immigration agents. This collaboration often results in record-breaking numbers of detentions and deportations originating from local law enforcement encounters. One local sheriff even publicly boasted on air that his department was now twice as effective at identifying and removing undocumented individuals, often stemming from minor violations like traffic stops or expired vehicle registration tags. Think about that. Effectiveness measured by the removal of people, often initiated by the smallest infraction. It highlights a shift in priorities where immigration enforcement takes precedence. You'd be shocked how fast a simple routine stop for a minor issue can escalate into a life-altering nightmare involving detention and potential deportation in Arizona's current climate. And here's something most people outside the state might not know. Arizona is also experimenting with new, sometimes controversial methods. Take the state's Community Watch Incentive Program. This initiative offers tax credits to private citizens who report individuals they suspect are undocumented to the authorities. Imagine your neighbors being financially incentivized to watch you and report you based on suspicion alone. It sounds like something from a dystopian novel, but it's a real program being implemented. Consider the environment this creates. Scorching desert heat, vast and unforgiving landscapes, and now, laws and programs that make you afraid to even walk outside, interact with neighbors, or drive to the store. Who is truly surviving in this environment? The hostility isn't just in the climate, it's embedded in the legal and social structures. Hospitals are also feeling the pressure to report undocumented patients, adding another layer of fear to seeking essential health care. Even schools are impacted, with anti-sanctuary laws prohibiting districts from enacting policies that might shield undocumented students or their families. There's virtually no wiggle room, no safe zone. Even private citizens are enlisted in the enforcement effort. Arizona's approach isn't just about enforcing existing laws. It seems aimed at making life so untenable for undocumented individuals that they choose to leave. The state isn't just following, it's actively pursuing, questioning, and detaining, turning everyday life into a constant state of high alert. At number 3, we examine Tennessee. You might not immediately associate the volunteer state, known for its vibrant country music scene and the scenic beauty of the Smoky Mountains, with harsh immigration policies. However, looks can be deceiving. Tennessee is quietly but steadily becoming one of the most dangerous places in the U.S. for undocumented immigrants, implementing a web of policies that increase surveillance and risk. It began subtly, with whispers and localized actions. Individual counties started quietly partnering with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, often through programs like 287G, which deputizes local officers to perform federal immigration functions. These agreements weren't always widely publicized, but they laid the groundwork for increased enforcement. But in 2025, those localized whispers have amplified into loud statewide action. Tennessee enacted a significant statewide bill that fundamentally changes the role of state employees in immigration matters. This new law now requires state employees, a broad category encompassing everyone from public school teachers and university staff to DMV clerks and social workers, to report individuals they suspect of being undocumented to law enforcement authorities. Think about the implications. The person issuing your driver's license renewal, the administrator checking your child into school, or even a staff member at a state agency you interact with, might now be legally obligated to scrutinize your status and potentially initiate a process that could lead to your detention. This transforms routine interactions with state services into potential points of capture. That's correct. Seeking essential state services or fulfilling civic duties could inadvertently trigger an immigration investigation against you or your family members. You'd be shocked how quickly and easily your personal information could travel from a routine form or interaction into the hands of immigration enforcement, even if you haven't committed any other offense. The law effectively turns a vast network of public servants into eyes and ears for immigration authorities. Furthermore, local jails in many Tennessee counties have become active hubs for ICE. Even arrests for petty misdemeanors, minor offenses that might typically result in a fine or short-term detention, can now get you flagged, held specifically for ICE, and ultimately handed over for deportation proceedings. Statistics reveal a disturbing trend. Over 60% of all immigration arrests originating in Tennessee last year stemmed directly from traffic-related offenses. Let that sink in. People are facing deportation, having their lives uprooted, potentially initiated by something as common as a speeding ticket or a broken taillight. The consequences are disproportionate to the initial infraction. Adding another layer of pressure, the state has expanded its E-Verify mandates. E-Verify is the electronic system used to check the employment eligibility of new hires. Tennessee's expanded requirements now compel even smaller businesses to use this system, making it increasingly difficult for undocumented individuals to find work, even under the radar. One negative flag during an E-Verify check, perhaps due to documentation issues or errors, doesn't just mean losing a job opportunity. It could mean your entire future in the state evaporates, as your information is potentially shared with enforcement agencies. Local jails are functioning as ICE playgrounds, with agents having broad access to arrest and detain individuals, often following minor infractions, sometimes without specific warrants related to immigration status. Disturbingly, Tennessee is also one of the few states that explicitly permit law enforcement to set up traffic checkpoints specifically based on suspected immigration status. These aren't border checkpoints. They can be established in quiet suburban neighborhoods or along rural highways, far from any international boundary. Officers at these checkpoints don't necessarily need a reason related to a traffic violation to stop you. Suspicion about status can be enough. Even churches and nonprofit organizations, traditionally seen as safe havens offering support, are reportedly facing increased scrutiny and audits by the state, often under the guise of public safety concerns. The state pressures these organizations to report any undocumented individuals they assist, effectively chilling efforts to provide aid and support within the community. So ask yourself, when your school, your workplace, your local church, and even the cop on the beat could all be part of the same enforcement trap. Where can you possibly run? In Tennessee, the answer is becoming increasingly unclear. Number 2 brings us to Louisiana. Think the Deep South is all about jazz, Mardi Gras beads, and delicious jambalaya? Think again. While Louisiana boasts a rich cultural heritage, the reality for undocumented immigrants is becoming increasingly stark. The rhythm of life here has shifted, and those without legal status are increasingly caught in the crossfire of stringent enforcement and a historically burdened justice system. In Louisiana, the situation is particularly complex due to the state's pre-existing challenges. For starters, Louisiana has long grappled with having one of the highest incarceration rates, not just in the United States, but globally. This means the state already operates a massive prison and jail system, an infrastructure that can easily be leveraged for immigration detention and enforcement purposes. Now, in 2025, this system is being increasingly utilized as a weapon against undocumented individuals. Local jails, already potentially overcrowded, are becoming flooded with immigration holds. ICE agents reportedly have extensive access within these facilities, allowing them to readily identify, arrest, and detain individuals flagged for potential immigration violations, often following arrests for even minor, unrelated offenses. Getting caught in the Louisiana justice system without papers can quickly lead to being funneled into the federal deportation pipeline, often with limited access to legal resources. You'd be shocked at how aggressively this state has pivoted its existing law enforcement infrastructure towards immigration control in recent years. Louisiana also passed a significant new law this year, mirroring trends in other states, which empowers local law enforcement agencies to check the immigration status of individuals during any lawful stop, detention, or arrest. Crucially, the law removes the requirement for officers to have a separate suspicion about immigration status before making inquiries. This means that any interaction with police, a traffic stop, questioning related to a minor incident, even being a witness, can now potentially include questions about your right to be in the country. Just walking home from work, if you happen to encounter law enforcement for any reason, could lead to you being held in a cell while your status is investigated. Even undocumented children are not shielded from the pervasive watchfulness. While schools may not directly report students, the climate of fear impacts families profoundly. Furthermore, school districts face pressure under state directives to cooperate with federal agencies, and policies regarding the documentation required for enrollment can create barriers and anxiety for undocumented parents, leading some to avoid the school system altogether. The state has also cracked down on sanctuary policies. Any city or parish attempting to limit cooperation with federal immigration authorities faces potential state funding cuts and legal action. There are essentially no safe havens. The state mandates cooperation across the board. This creates an environment where local police are effectively compelled to act as extensions of federal immigration enforcement. What makes Louisiana particularly challenging is the intersection of its high incarceration rates and these new immigration laws. An arrest for a minor offense, which might result in minimal consequences for a citizen, can trigger an immigration hold for an undocumented person, potentially leading to prolonged detention in facilities known for difficult conditions, far from family and legal support, before eventual deportation. It's a system where minor mistakes can have catastrophic, life-altering consequences magnified solely by one's immigration status. The vibrant culture of Louisiana might seem welcoming on the surface, but beneath the festivities, a different tune is playing for undocumented residents. The policies creeping across the state are anything but celebratory. It's no longer just about traditional law and order. It's about fear, control, and using the existing powerful carceral state to enforce immigration agendas. In Louisiana, freedom increasingly feels like a privilege reserved only for the documented. Finally, at number 1, we arrive at South Carolina. Sunshine, beautiful beaches, and that famous southern charm might be what comes to mind. Perhaps you picture historic Charleston or the golf courses of Myrtle Beach, idyllic scenes often featured on postcards. But for undocumented immigrants, the reality in South Carolina is rapidly diverging from those picturesque images. Beneath the Palmetto State's welcoming veneer, a storm is brewing, making it arguably one of the most dangerous states in the country if you lack legal documentation. This year, 2025, South Carolina lawmakers passed one of the most audacious and far-reaching anti-immigration bills witnessed recently, signaling a significant escalation in the state's enforcement posture. This new legislation doesn't just target undocumented individuals themselves, it casts a wide net, aiming squarely at anyone perceived as assisting them. This includes landlords who rent property, employers who provide jobs, and even family members or friends who might offer shelter or transportation. You heard that correctly. Under this new law, if you are caught knowingly housing or transporting someone without legal papers, even a relative or close friend, you could face serious consequences, including potential jail time and substantial fines. The law is designed to isolate undocumented individuals, making it risky for anyone in the community to offer support. Think about the implications. A church offering shelter, a neighbor giving a ride to a doctor's appointment, a family member letting a relative stay with them. All these acts of basic human kindness could now be interpreted as criminal offenses under South Carolina law. This creates an environment where fear replaces compassion, and communities are pressured to turn against their neighbors. Furthermore, the law mandates increased cooperation between state and local law enforcement and federal immigration agencies like ICE. Police officers are not only empowered but, in many cases, required to inquire about immigration status during routine stops if they have any suspicion. And similar to trends in other states on this list, suspicion remains a vaguely defined term, raising concerns about profiling. Schools are also under pressure. While not explicitly deporting students, policies are being pushed to require schools to document the legal status of parents during enrollment. This sensitive information could potentially be shared with state agencies, creating immense fear among parents and potentially leading children to be withdrawn from the education system altogether. State funding is being weaponized, with threats of cuts to school districts or municipalities that attempt to implement any form of sanctuary or non-cooperation policy. There is no refuge. The state demands universal compliance with its aggressive enforcement agenda. Employers face tightened E-Verify requirements, making it nearly impossible for undocumented individuals to secure legitimate employment. Even accessing essential services like healthcare can become fraught with risk, as hospitals may face subtle or overt pressure to report patients lacking documentation. South Carolina may present a charming face to tourists, but the policies being enacted paint a very different picture for undocumented residents. It's becoming a state where one wrong move, renting an apartment, accepting a ride, even seeking medical help, could lead to devastating consequences, not just for the undocumented individual, but for anyone trying to help them. The system is designed to make life untenable, to encourage self-deportation through fear and isolation. The Southern charm facade is crumbling, revealing a harsh reality where basic survival becomes a daily struggle against a system actively working to remove you. One misstep, one interaction with the wrong person at the wrong time, and your entire life, the life you've carefully built, could disappear overnight. So, what can we conclude from this tour of the 10 potentially most dangerous states for undocumented immigrants in 2025? The landscape is undeniably shifting, with a clear trend of states enacting increasingly harsh laws and empowering local authorities to engage in federal immigration enforcement. From Texas's SB4, setting a precedent, to copycat laws in Oklahoma and Iowa, to Florida's multi-pronged approach targeting everything from driving to healthcare, the pressure is mounting. Georgia and Alabama leverage existing infrastructure and revive old tactics, while Arizona pioneers controversial methods like citizen reporting incentives. Tennessee mandates reporting by state employees. Louisiana intertwines immigration with its high incarceration rates, and South Carolina targets not just the undocumented, but anyone who helps them. This patchwork of state laws creates a confusing and perilous environment. What's legal or tolerated in one state can lead to arrest and deportation just across the border. Routine activities, driving, working, going to school, seeking medical care, renting a home, are becoming points of extreme vulnerability. The fear is pervasive, impacting not just individuals, but entire families and communities, leading to displacement, economic hardship, and a breakdown of social trust. While legal challenges continue, the immediate human cost is undeniable. The land of opportunity narrative feels increasingly distant for those living under the shadow of these state-level crackdowns. It's a complex situation with deep historical roots and significant political drivers, but the human impact remains the most critical element. Understanding these realities is the first step towards informed discussion and potential change. Thank you for joining us on our channel today. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Your engagement helps us continue this important work.